Bam.
Hi, this is Erik Kleinsmith again, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
So much Erik Kleinsmith on the Break It Down show.
Hi.
But, we got to have our experts
I
and the
I
people
just
that
can't get away.
I know. So we're going to talk about Jimmy Hoffa in a minute, but I thought we
Yeah.
had to at least cover some current event stuff. We have
Yeah.
two active conflicts. One of them is in Europe, of all places, and the other one is just around the corner from Europe. So where do you want to start? You want to talk about Ukraine? You want to talk about Israel?
I talked about Israel. I mean, I would tell you, I would just tell you in terms of Ukraine, it's no longer, they're no longer the belle of the ball.
Nope.
It's our media operates in a very myopic fashion, and it's all driven by ratings and as a business and numbers and things like that. And so when on October 7th, everybody forgot about what Ukraine was almost overnight. Just like the withdrawal of Afghanistan, people forgot about that. And now, I'm seeing stories that I guess the Pakistanis are tearing down the Afghani camps and settlements using bulldozers. They're not intense or anything like that, but they're forcing 1.7 Afghanis to go back into Afghanistan during the winter. And so and guess what? Nobody even knows about that.
Right.
Nobody's even thinking about that because it's all 24/7 Gaza Strip and Israel, Hamas, and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we are. And I would tell you, it's like I gave a talk to a company in Michigan a couple of weeks ago. A friend of mine who from high school was the chief human resources officer. So they had their CEO's dinner. Great venue, great groups. About 50 people that I spoke to, and I did a lot of stuff that we talk about here on the Break It Down show. So I talked a little bit about background, talked a little bit about went through the different cold cases that I've worked, and then I said let's end this on a cheery note. Let's talk about Israel Hamas, tongue in cheek. And I thought when I left 20 minutes for questions as per our agreement, and I thought all the questions would be about cold cases. And I tell you, Pete, the folks that I talk to, and it's not just them, and it's everywhere else. They're scared. Pardon my language. They're scared shitless.
Yeah.
What is going on in the Middle East, especially as we talk about, how open our borders are, and how many of them could have made it over here. And now you're looking at demonstrations downtown and all that stuff. That's incredibly scary to folks who, could go about used to be able to go about their day and say, that's the rest of the world. I'm working on my own life. And now all of a sudden it's like, there's a potential of this reaching out and touching me directly.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also a lot of fear being spread about all of this stuff from folks who make their money in fear. And I know you get this with your cold case stuff. The folks that are incented to keep a cold case cold, they hate to solve it, because the reality is okay, sure, you can always worry about nuclear war, but it's just not very likely to happen.
Right.
The Israelis are going to be able to handle Hamas. It's not going to be a problem. And here's the other thing that nobody talks about. I know you know this as well too. So this is for the audience, but all of it, like, Hamas is directed from these other countries and these hotels and everything. Right. I guarantee you, the Israelis are like, inculcate, assassinate. All those things are going to happen because the war is not going to stop when they have a ceasefire in Gaza. This is a worldwide war, and wherever Hamas is, they're going to go kill those people.
And you don't know why we know this? Because they've done it.
They've done it.
And it's not just after the Munich massacre, 1972. Right. With they did the whole movie with that. No, they've done it recently. And there's been news stories of because they got picked out. I want to say it was Kuwait City.
Yeah,
that they went in and got somebody and took them out, and I can't remember who the target was, but I do remember that the news organizations were able to pinpoint these were the folks coming in. They're the ones who did it, and it wasn't too many years ago. I want to say it was 2014.
Yeah. And they've done that before too. Adolf Eichmann, right? And you can say, it's okay because he's a Nazi. But the fact is they went into some other country's nation, snatched up a citizen of that nation, flew them to extradite them back to Israel, tried and killed that person. Right. Okay, great. But we know, like, they will do this. They will go to these lengths, and the folks have no idea how serious they're taking this war. Right. And it might be 10 years from now that they killed the last person from Hamas that they want to kill, but they're going to kill them. Absolutely.
Well, yeah. And when I told you on October 8th, I said this will be the end of Hamas. I mean, not
Yeah.
they'll survive in current form and not in current form, but in absentia. They'll be hiding out in pockets like Al Qaeda did for the longest time, especially after we moved into Afghanistan and moved into Iraq. I mean, they did survive in small bits and pieces, but again, over time they were snuffed out. ISIS kind of exists. Al Qaeda exists really only in name. I mean, once Zawahiri was gone, that was the lifeblood of the organization. So,
one of the things that's interesting to me is our State Department runs around and tries to broker their deals and everything. We've sent 2 carrier groups to the region, and submarines have been open about this.
Right.
What does that indicate to you? Because a carrier group, pretty normal to have that show up. To have 2 show up,
right,
that's a different thing.
Yeah, this is your. I mean, there's always a carrier group in the near the in the Persian Gulf. I mean, there's always one rotating in there in the Indian Ocean or someplace like that. But to move one into the Eastern Mediterranean, that was really the biggest push with the USS Ford moving there. Really, if you need to equate that with something, that's the 2 kids in the neighborhood that are fighting, and so and there's other bigger kids saying maybe we should jump in and help one kid over another, and it's really the US saying let these guys, nope, don't escalate this conflict. If you step in, we step in, and I think obviously that's a hugely simplified piece to that, but I mean, look at what's going on with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is not Shiite; they're Sunni.
Right.
No, I'm sorry. Let me go back. I'm going to go back on that one. They are Hezbollah is Shiite. It's the Gazans are Sunni, and if they weren't fighting the Israelis as a common enemy, they'd be going after each other. And that's really when I talked about the last time about the different layers. It's really a Saudi Sunni versus Iran Shia rift that is going on, and it's been going on since the death of Muhammad. That schism that has taken place, that has been going on long before the country or the state of Israel was created. But but again, so you've got these centuries old conflicts that just wounds will never heal.
We see a lot of stuff going on campuses and cities. I was in Austria this week, and there were. It's unfair to call it a protest because that sounds much different, but there was a group of people chanting, had their standard, I'd like to put a picture in here, but they had standard propaganda printed out poster, and they were doing all this, and basically every Arab from the area was there. And look, they have a right to do that, and they weren't causing a problem, but this is a very big movement, and it all looks very similar when you see this protest, that protest, that protest.
Well, I mean, and it's not just, there is no such thing now in our day and age. There is no such thing as a spontaneous protest that gets that large. Every single one of them has an organizational system, has a support system, has a logistics system that sets it up. That the same people that were involved with this are the same people that were involved with organizing the Antifa demonstration. Same people that were organizing, to a degree, the Black Lives Matter protests, and even fueling the 2020 riots that took. I'd say your Black Lives Matter marches that took place during the day. Those same foot soldiers would go. The folks that were there during the day. That's your families, your regular people. But as soon as it got dark, it's when the crazies come out. In the words of a great Secret Service brother of mine, when you work nights at the White House, that's when the crazies come out. And that's what these poor guys were up against on Saturday. The thing is when you do look at the crowd, these are not Palestinians. These are college kids, and the same kids that were throwing bottles of urine and rocks and bottles and that kind of stuff at the Secret Service and in Lafayette Park 3 years ago are the same people that are there today. It's just a new class. What's the most troubling part is when you do break down terror organizations or extremist movements, your next generation are folks that are getting hardened in that crowd, that night. The folks that are listening to the propaganda and the chants and the drums and the whistles and the repeat after me type stuff. Those folks that are getting getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and if we're fueling that with our social media and fueling that with these organizers, a handful of them are going to harden themselves enough to become to the point they're going to become operatives and terrorists and conduct their own attacks. I mean, we're not even talking about how many people on the terror watch list that they've picked up in the last 2 years, 260.
Yeah.
In a very conservative estimate, if we caught, for every 10 that we caught, if only one terrorist was able to sneak in, they'd still have 26 terrorists that have gotten through and are now operating within the country. Well, how many people did it take for 9/11? 19.
Yeah.
And so and I guess I've seen a more robust number is that for every one that they catch, 2 are making it in. Then if that's the case, then you have a battalion that has made it inside the U.S. and is now conducting the initial stages, planning stages, recon stages, target selection, weaponization, all the different stages that lead up to a terrorist attack. They're working in their cells and they're working in different areas to identify those their targets. So it's, that's what I mean. Is like when I gave this talk, I had folks that, probably 4 or 5 weeks ago couldn't pick out Israel on a map.
Right.
And, or Gaza Strip, West Bank, Golan Heights, any of those places that are in dispute, but are now absolutely terrified of what might come out of this. And that's what I mean by that when we started answering questions with this group, and this is an upstanding, intelligent people that work this. These are CEOs, deputy CEOs, human resource officers working for this company. And that's all they wanted to. That's what they wanted to talk about. And every question, I mean, one of the first ones I got was, "Are we just going to hell in a handbasket? Is society just falling apart?" And the answer to almost all their questions the best I could give them, and most optimistic thing I could say was, "It's going to get worse before it gets better, but eventually it will get better."
Yeah, there is something to be said for our combined intelligence abilities, with AI doing things and the ability to scrape and look at how news is published. You can start to identify with pretty good detail the rough picture, and then you just zoom in and you get the fine picture, and you can all of a sudden you're looking at Home Depot receipts for bricks to be delivered on a pallet.
Right.
Bricks come from somewhere. I mean, someone bought them, and so a lot of this can be looked at, and the system does tend to prosecute people who are the problem at that level. It doesn't do very much good to go arrest Jane Fonda again. That doesn't matter. But the folks that are organizing this thing, they do leave a trail.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, what we've skewed ourselves to the point of ridiculous by talking about, January 6th incessantly. And now you have something that has risen to that level and nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. It's like, if you're going to use it for one type of riot, you got to use it for all of them. If you're gonna put BLM, if you're gonna say it's a BLM is a mostly peaceful protest while the city's on fire behind you, putting blood prints on the and defacing statues and then actually trying to climb the White House fence. I'll tell you right now, from with a brother was retired Secret Service after 30 years, mostly spending his time at the White House. One of these folks has gotten across, that'd have been bad news for whoever the first, the FAFO guy who decided, I'm going to go in first and find out what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, there's good Lord. I mean, and then there was a guy years ago that made it over the fence in the middle of the day, got into the West Wing, into the first door or whatever. But that was only because of series of lapses, and the timing, it just was perfect for whoever this crazy dude was. But no harm came from that. But on a night like that, this would be clear the station, all hands on deck type of a thing. So
yeah. You alluded to earlier this notion that white supremacy is the biggest threat to America. Let's not undermine that threat, but I can't take that seriously. Just like
Right.
global climate change is the biggest threat globally.
Right.
Like these aren't serious people that are talking about this. It's definitely driven by ideology. So do we
Sure.
worry about that, or do we just let the energy that it takes to keep these things up dwindle, and then allow the real problems to be dealt with? Because ultimately, there are good people in the government trying to solve these problems, but it takes an enormous amount of energy to keep a false premise up, because
Right.
it takes an enormous amount of energy to actually go after legitimately bad things, bad people.
Right. I mean, this is what happened when the IRA blew up a hotel that trying to kill Margaret Thatcher in the 80s.
Margaret Thatcher.
They missed her because of the timing, but they blew the face off of this hotel. And as the message came out from the UK government that says, the prime minister's fine, the message from the IRA came out and says, you only have to be lucky one time. I'm sorry, you have to be lucky every time. We only have to be lucky once. We only have to be successful one time. You have to be successful to thwart us every single time. And so, I mean, to kind of back off and try to see if it'll diffuse itself, we don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
Not with the state of the world, not with, again, I'm one of the reasons why 9/11 occurred.
Right.
I feel that every single day, for 20 plus years, that's weighed heavily on my shoulder that, we had the ability to stop them when we failed.
Yeah.
I'm same thing is brewing. The same thing is worked up. And I think I was on talking to you a year and a half ago when we talked about the fall of Afghanistan. I said the planning process for the next crisis has started, and you've got 18 to 24 months before the next one happens. So here we are 24 months later, and war between Israel and Hamas breaks out. Now look at if you've got a planning process that's now starting up for attacks within, what part of that stage of the planning process are we in? Oh, Pete, I think I lost you. You froze up on me, or I froze up on you. Hey, you back?
Back. My Wi-Fi has just about gone kaput. I've got to replace some gear, maybe.
I get that. I get that every so often. It's
so frustrating when you're trying to have an important conversation. So we've talked about Israel quite a bit, and we talked about Hamas, about internal things.
Yeah.
Let's real quick go to Ukraine, and I'll set the premise. It appears that this war is nearly over. I mean, like you said, the tensions on Israel, Hamas, and we're not going to give the Ukrainians a decisive weapon to win their fight. So we're not going to do that. They're not going to be able to do it themselves. They're running out of people and money and time and effort. I just don't see it being a lot of energy. What are your thoughts on that, though? Maybe that's not accurate.
I go back to, how did World War I end? I mean, in reality, it wasn't, if it wasn't for the Americans coming in droves and reinforcing those sides. I mean, the Germans made a big push in 1918, really kind of squandered their last reserves by making a push, especially toward Amiens and the northern portion of the line. But essentially, both sides ground to a halt, and that's kind of what you're seeing in, once you get into this a grind here and there, the days of tanks doing blitzkrieg attacks and puncturing lines and shoving everything through and then exploiting from within. We're learning some big lessons here on, that is not necessarily the case unless you have absolutely overwhelming superiority of the air, of the logistics, of the ground forces, of the information sphere. we're learning our own lessons as well as the rest of the world. That when you do not have that kind of superiority, and you have to have all these things lined up, you're going to slog it out. You're going to slog it out, and you got one Verdun after another, where they're bleeding. They're bleeding each other dry. I've read assessment where the Russian military, the army in particular, is now down to 50% strength of what it was.
Yeah.
That is combat ineffective, in by U.S. standards.
Yeah, and also a generational wound that you have to heal, and that means that Russia's wobbling. We don't need Russia to wobble. We need Russia to be able to protect its nuclear assets and to also push back its neighbors and say, hey, don't mess with the bear.
Right.
And so you do reach that point where, we get rid of Putin. Yes, they got rid of Putin. You find, oh crap, this is the wrong guy. Took over afterwards.
The thing is I keep saying this, and they said this after the Arab Spring. Hey, we got rid of Mubarak in Egypt. Hey, fantastic. There's going to be a Western-style democracy. No. There are no Thomas Jeffersons. There's no James Madisons. There's no Ben Franklins that the culture does not have those types of thinkers. And so you're not going to have that kind of, representative, a federal republic like we have in the West. So it's a wholly unique Western and American idea of government that is very hard to take roots anywhere else in the world.
And think about our own beginnings. We often forget this. The first guy in charge was a warrior. He went out and he figured out how to win, and the statesmen went out, figured out how to do their part. And so what does that look like? So yeah, you're right. The Russian thing is going to be interesting, and they are grinding down. Right. And this is a reality too, because of the ground that Russia currently owns, that has a lot of people who want to be Russians in it.
Right.
That's where a lot of the industrial capacity of Ukraine is. Mm-hmm. And that is going to present a problem. And that's interesting, because when we talk about foreign policy, we often look at business as being a bad thing, like billionaires, that kind of thing. We don't want that. But who's going to rebuild the titanium processing, the gas storage, the gas transport, infrastructure? It's going to have to be people that know how to do that. Yeah. And we openly say we don't like those people, and we call them oligarchs. But the fact is these heavy industries have to be run by people who know how to run them.
Right. Well, I mean, I think what you'll end up with is the Donbass region ultimately, is always going to stay in the Russian hands unless something drastically changes. But I think the Ukrainians have a good chance of taking the Crimea back, which is one of the things. They chased the Russian Black Sea Fleet all the way to almost the border with Georgia, to the farthest eastern part, because their land-based systems can, unmanned vehicles can go and attack the Russian fleet, especially as they have been taking more ground in Crimea. Yeah. So it's how long do two boxers keep going at it and slugging each other when they're just exhausted at it?
Yeah.
And that's sad to say how many people died over simply a status quo of what was in 2014.
Yeah, and also how long does the funding element of that? How long do we want to pay for that? I mean, Europe doesn't want to do it. If we said, "Hey, we're done," Europe is going to let Ukraine figure itself out.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, is the threat. The one of the biggest fears of the threat was, well, if they roll over Ukraine, next will be Poland, next will be Moldova, next will be Putin is an empire builder. He's going to want to move in all the areas that was former Warsaw Pact and that kind of thing. I would tell you the Poles are becoming one of the strongest bulwarks against that. Even more so, even with more backbone than even the Germans are showing right now. Yeah. So I have a lot of respect for the Poles building their army up. Of course, we have army, U.S. Army units stationed there now. That have been invited in doing their 16-month rotations. I know soldiers, a buddy of mine, his son's there right now. So it's one of those areas where it's just fantastic that you have a country that has stepped up and rebuilt itself so effectively. Ukrainians aren't going to be able to rebuild their infrastructure, as you described, until they stop fighting.
Yeah, and they're going to have to rebuild it in a way where we have to allow them to do that. We've done such a poor job. We bring ideology into reconstruction and stability, and ultimately what we sow is instability, because we're working on problems that are several tranches, several iterations of success down the road, but we're desperate to have, oh, I don't know, female rights be a leading thing, but then we're not willing to stay and see it out. And so if I was the Ukrainians, frankly, I wouldn't want the Americans as partners. I'd want them to get out of the way and let us run our own country, because the U.S. has proven to be a bad ally or a bad friend. I mean, how many times have we turned our backs on the Kurds? I mean, fill in the blank. How many, Israel's here right now fighting for their existence against their mortal enemy. And the U.S. is actively pushing ceasefire. Like we wouldn't ceasefire that. Right. We would be reigning, and we killed, right, I don't know how many million people in Iraq and Afghanistan, as we went and got our retribution against a country that didn't even do anything. Come on. And now they're supposed to be all into ceasefires. I wouldn't want us as a partner.
I don't think, well, for the first thing, and from what I know about the Israeli national security, they have made it their policy never to have to rely upon the West or the U.S. because, and it's not just us. I mean, every Western democracy, changes periodically. So from a long-term alliance standpoint, the West can be schizophrenic. One day that they're your allies, then a new administration comes in, next day they're not, or vice versa. Depending on policy. So they've made it a point that, we have to be self-reliant almost completely. That's why the percentage of their members of their military is higher than any other country in the world. It's something above 6%, where we're below less than 0.5% or something like that.
Right.
I mean, it's just, that's their standing, their standing defense. Same thing with their own weapon systems. Same thing with their own technologies. A lot of folks, don't know this, but the pioneers in UAV technology for military purposes was the Israelis. I mean, we learned from them, and that's why when you and I were in the Balkans, I think I built an airstrip for a Marine UAV company. They had the old Pioneers, which were simply, good Lord. I think it was more of a proof of concept that we needed to get rid of them. Because the first one that we launched there crashed into a neighbor's building. They had to put out a luncheon spread for the nearby village to make sure everybody was happy. So, I mean, that was us in the 90s when, the Israelis already had UAVs down. In fact, I was seeing footage of them going after Hezbollah using UAVs as recon before, to help pinpoint locations before fighter jets came in.
Yeah.
So they were doing
one of the things funny about the Israeli thing too is we say, oh, well, Hezbollah is going to fight them as well. I promise you, Israel's like, yeah, we should anticipate having to fight both of those guys at the same time, and so they've trained and prepared for it. I mean, look, I'm not going to say Hamas and Hezbollah are not a real threat, because obviously they are, but they fight indirectly because that's where they're strongest, by surprise and cunning and vile actions. They don't want to go toe to toe with the organized Israeli military. There's no way.
No. And that's the thing is, like, there is a difference between Hezbollah and the Lebanese military. The Lebanese military does not have effective control over the southern part. The Hezbollah really controls that. Do they have more missiles? Yes. Do they have more fighters than Gaza does? Yes. Are they funded, primarily through Syria, but from Iran? Yeah, same thing. But again, the Israelis fought, a handful of wars and won every one of them, to include the 1973. When it was a surprise attack, they defended the Golan Heights against a massive Syrian assault with armored vehicles and everything, and they had handfuls of guys in tanks fighting them off. I think at one time they had only 19 tanks on the whole area defending that entire part of the border, but they were able to do it successfully. One
of the things that go ahead.
No, that's ingrained in their psyche and therefore ingrained into their national policy.
Two of the things that impact these kind of modern fights is, one, like, can you logistically deal with the fight you're going to do? Like, everybody wanted Israel to rush in. Like, Israel's like, nope, we got to make sure we have boots and belts and uniforms and food and, everything. You don't just have to, but you go with the speed of your logistics. And the other thing is, like, you'll talk about the manning, the size of the military, but if you put your tank out on a battlefield and it can't fire tables correctly in practice, you're going to end up dead. You can have all the people you want. If you're fighting against the trained military that practices and knows the stuff, they're going to destroy you.
Yeah. And I tell you, there's no such thing as a perfect tank. Once you get into combat, I mean, I fired tank table 8 several times, and I had the last time I did, I had a fantastic day run. I mean, we were way up into the point count, and then my commander decided he wanted to use my tank for his night run, and he fired it, did the run, and then I had to fire right after him, and we were not able to recalibrate the tank. It was so old. I mean, the serial number on it was 9. I mean, it had XM1 on the data plate. It was that old of a tank.
Right.
And we ran it right after him, even though we had it bore sighted and ready to go. He did the run, and so once we got back in the tank and did our night run, it was atrocious because our aiming was off, and we ended up doing Kentucky windage, which you're not supposed to do with a then $2 million vehicle.
Right.
That's what we ended up doing just to get through the table. So that's the kind of thing that the panic that sets in with some of these some of the training and the logistics and the preparation that has to go. But the other thing was, they're not going in and fighting. One, Gaza's not going anywhere. 2,
Right.
the Egyptians have sealed the border. Also, the Egyptians aren't going to help, the Palestinian refugees. So they're stuck there. So they have to make every deliberate method, as possible to try to go in to minimize their own casualties and then minimize the civilians that are still there. I just read today that they found rocket launch sites either underneath or right next to a Boy Scout center, right next to under their complex. One of their headquarters is underneath the main hospital, next to a mosque. I mean, this to me is one of the atrocities of wars. Is when you do that, when you occupy a school with a missile battery, there may be children in it as human shields, but it is no longer a school.
Right.
You've just made it a military target, and and the disgust of sacrificing these children or sacrificing these families to hide behind them is one of the most horrible things. And I talked about that. I said, all these innocent lives that are going to be lost. But the Israelis have to do everything they can to go in and a method, with the systematic process of shutting down sections, blowing junctures of sections of tunnels, and then cleaning out that tunnel like cleaning out, honestly, like rats, and trying to minimize the hostage, trying to rescue hostages at the same time. I see, all these calls for just flood the tunnels. It's like that doesn't guarantee you that you're going to do this in the same effective way. You can.
And also, by the way, it's not as simple as just flood the tunnel. That seems like an easy answer, but anything in tunnels is harder. Like to include having to have, I'll say scuba, some kind of self-contained breathing, because you don't know what's down there, and you don't. And the distance between you and aid, it's hyper dangerous and complicated. And you can flood a table and all of a sudden, or flood a tunnel, and all of a sudden you've created a worse problem. So it's complex. I wanted to go into one more area, unless you have something else to say about Israel.
No, that was just it. With the tunnels, is the best way to do it is to do your best job at mapping them out, find the key junctures, close those off, and then you have one section at a time that you can work in as safe a manner as possible. Right.
And whatever that matter is, dogs, exploding foam, or whatever it's going to be, you fight, and you're ready for a nasty fight.
Right.
The last thing is, a lot of folks are sowing a lot of fear because that's how they make their money. And one of the areas is like, well, now China's going to go invade Taiwan. I'm not on that. I just look, could it happen? Yes. But as well as I do, to put any kind of armored vehicle on the water and cruise it across 100 miles, especially that straight. Yep. Good. I don't think that we could right now, Eric. I don't think we could do it reliably and go put a winning force on the ground. I just don't see it.
Right. I tell you, that is one of the. I want to say it's the analysts call it high impact, low probability, but that is like off the charts on high impact, but it's also very low probability. And it's not just that. It's you do hear a lot of scary stories about what China's doing around the world, the Road and Belt Initiative, the securing the rare earth metals and the mines, rights to mining around the world, the building bases in the Spratly Islands, that kind of stuff, all those things, and then just the entire attitude that's coming out of China that that we will become the next superpower. We will overtake the U.S. and that kind of thing. China is sitting on a very fragile economic foundation.
Boy, are they ever.
And now, now one of the last reports I've read is that when Trump came to office, one of the things he kept talking about was, his words, China. But when we got to divest ourselves from that. Even though he's no longer president, that is still happening. Yeah. And it's not and it's not the Americans that are doing it. I mean, by and large, it's the rest of the world that's like, this is not what we want. And so this is the first time that the Chinese have had a retraction to their economy, I think since 1991. I mean, it's just been, and it's been a very sudden shift, and they cannot afford. There's like a Ponzi scheme with how they're building and how they're spending money and that kind of thing, where they cannot afford the money to dry up like that. It reverberates all through the rest of their economy and starts shutting sections of it down. Beside the fact that they are also very vulnerable to disruption of oil and raw materials flowing into China. And the Australians are having a problem with the rarity of being able to get a hold of lumber because it's all going to China because they own a vast majority of the wood manufacturing and the paper manufacturing. That's a lot of the print plants are now in China.
Yeah,
even for textbooks, things like that.
It always comes down to these resources and the foreign policies that you put together to protect yourself from these things. Yep. And that's what makes Taiwan such a big lift. Like the amount of energy, the amount of human lives to get onto that island in a significant way. Right. And then to withstand not only the initial assault, which is going to be horrific, but then just the counterinsurgency, where you're just going to have people constantly working to undermine your ability to do things. And all it takes is reprovisioning from the sky, which can be done, and I don't know. I don't see them taking that on when they're having so much success in so many other ways. And by the way, they have an exploding middle class and in size, and also they're elite rich people. They don't want this. They're buying up stuff in America. They're investing in America, not trying to fight it,
No. Right.
Let's talk Jimmy Hoffa. What's the latest with the case? Breaking news: Case Breakers have a new update on their Jimmy Hoffa case.
Yeah, we came out with an announcement on November 1st. Actually, we had the timing had to be midnight on November 1st because we had some friends in the UK that said, you're going to screw up our if you go out and don't announce it to the morning, you're screwing up our morning news cycle. So we won't be able to get to it till the end of the day. And at the end of the day, it's kind of late for us. So we're always playing catch up with the Americans. So we said, all right, we'll do it midnight so you guys can break it. And so we essentially, we got to the point where we could finally announce where we thought a possible burial location for Jimmy Hoffa was. Now I was 9 years old and living outside of Detroit when he was taken, but I was old enough to remember when that happened. My father was a teacher at a middle school in Plymouth, Michigan, where he came home, shortly after while the search was going on. And they said, they made every teacher go out in the parking lot. The police showed up and they searched all the cars because they had a tip off that Hoffa's body was in one of the trunks in one of their cars. I mean, that's how much I knew it as a kid and followed the story. So here we are 50 years, getting close to 50 years later, 48 years later, that we're now looking at possibility of burial location. And one of the best things that when we got this tip off, and the tip off was a cop that worked out of Chicago, had mob ties, named Harold Walters. And before he died in 1995, he gave his niece a message. And he said, if anything ever happens to me, and he was living in this remote cabin in, northern Wisconsin at the time for years. But he said, if anything happens to me, I want you to take this playing card that's stuck on the bulletin board behind me, and I want you to keep that and use it. And we've released a picture of the playing card. And it was an ace of spades from a local casino, but it had the names of the mob boss from the Chicago mob and a guy named Joey Iopa. It had the date September 16th, 1995, and then it had Jimmy Hoffa, and then it said third base, Milwaukee Stadium. So the message was that. And what we've pieced together, and we had some great investigators come in. I mean, again, a team of 40 folks. The niece that received the card after he passed away really kind of sat on it just because she was afraid of any repercussions that would happen to her. But it wasn't until 2020 that her and her former boyfriend, a guy named Jim Zimmerman, was able to come forward and come to our team and say, look, we have this fantastic tip off. And when you hear about it, you're just kind of like, this is insane. Even when I first heard about it, I was like, this is another Al Capone's vault. Nobody wants any, I don't even know if we really want any part of this.
Right.
But what we do with the way the case breakers have been working is a traditional way of doing a cold case. And if you just decide, you're an amateur sleuth, you really get into it, you watch a lot of true crime, I want to get into doing some investigation. For the large part, 99% of the folks that are doing that, what they're doing is they're researching the case, what happened, what happened before, and then what were all the leads that happened afterwards. So they're taking all these trails of leads going out, and they're, why the case has never been solved, because all those leads go dead in the same way they went dead the first time. Because unless there is a new piece of information, a new, what I call a spark, unless a new spark comes out that says, you know what, I got a new hypothesis that's totally outside of any of these others, or I have one that now reinforces one of the other hypotheses that it was this person or whatever. And that's, one of the cases with when we did the Zodiac killer, it was like, hey, you know what, this, folks have looked at this guy. Same thing with Robert Rackstraw as DB Cooper. Like, folks were looking at him, but it went cold and it died out. Well, we received new information that we then use to reverse engineer and validate it. Says, instead of doing it in a traditional way of going from the crime forward, let's take this piece of information and start working that back to try to validate it or deny it and just say, no, it's crap. And in this case, once again, this is our third case. We didn't find anything that refuted it. In fact, we started finding more and more information. We found information from neighbors up next to this guy's cabin that say that, look, the mob came to visit this guy twice a year. They came up in their fancy cars and they'd come in to visit him, and that was it. So the theory that we're working off of is after 1975, when Hoffa disappears, is that it was not the New York mob that was involved with it. It was the Chicago mob that was involved. When you go back and look, it's like, well, Hoffa was involved with the Chicago mob using Teamster funds, pulling money from the Teamster pension fund in order to fund their casinos that the Chicago mob was setting up. This is your Bugsy Siegel time, I'm sorry. And then the, I want to remember the case, but it was the Goodfellas, not that story. I'm trying to think of the one, the movie Casino. Again, those were real people. Those were folks that they were tied to the Chicago mafia. And so the cornfield that Joe Pesci is killed in, that's in Indiana, and that's not it out, that's not New York, and that's definitely not outside of Las Vegas. They killed him in the character that he played in Indiana. But that's the kind of the king. And one thing that really hit me is, as I was talking to a couple of folks in the FBI that I knew, one was a retired guy. And the first thing he said is like, look, just to give you a heads up, the guys who killed Hoffa don't know where he's buried. The guys who buried him know where he's buried, and nobody else. That's why it's so hard to figure this one out. Because it's in fact, the guys who probably buried him and took care of him probably had no idea who killed him. It's such a disjointed operation, and for OPSEC purposes expressly. So we were off the idea that he was kept in a container or whatever up at this guy's place in northern Wisconsin for a period of time, 20 years or whatever. And then as he got too old to watch over it, they decided, okay, we're going to move it. And now we're going to bury him at Milwaukee Park underneath the third base. And even at that time, they probably had an inkling that the stadium wasn't going to be there for a while, and that they did have one of the jokes that we heard is that now that as they tore down that ballpark in 2000 and put up the new one right next to it, where third base is now a parking lot and part of a little league ball field that they built in this place. It's a fantastic little league ball field, by the way.
It is. It's so nice there. Yeah.
Wow. I'm used to watching my kid with, a couple steel bleachers and a chain link fence, and that's about it. This holy cow. It had a picnic area. It's got an overhead area, but it has a maintenance shed. I mean, that's one of the locations. So one of the jokes was like, well, Hoff is now sleeping with the little leaguers. that's where they would leave them. So, and I've had some investigative reporters talk to me about it and says, well, that if they buried him on September 16th, the Brewers played a game 10 days after that. Somebody would have noticed that it was being torn up or something like that. It's like, well, September 16th could have been the day that they told them that they had already buried it or they had taken him, or it could have been the day that they picked up the container. The September 16th is not hard and fast on exactly when he was buried after that. So we went off of that tip. And the first thing I did is, Erik got the geospatial intelligence skills out, and I was able to find aerial photos of the location of the field before it was a field, when it was the old stadium, and then most recently afterwards. And so I was able to use, some very rudimentally initial look to try to pinpoint the location by overlaying 2 photographs to try to do that. Understanding that there were slightly different angles, that kind of thing. And the first thing I found is that there was a plaque inside this Little League ball field that says, this is where the old Hope plate was. No, it's about 15 feet off. In fact, it's outside the fence. And that's probably why it's like, we're not going to put it outside the fence. Somebody's going to steal it or whatever. So we'll put it inside the fence of this Little League ballpark. So we had to go off of where it actually was, according to the imagery, and then go 90 feet out to where third base was. And where we went out was a place up on a little high rise with a picnic area that then sloped down to the ball field. Again, fantastic ball field. I can't overstate. It's like, holy cow, it's nice.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in 2020, we got some volunteers. Again, our whole group is volunteers. And we got them dressed up. They went to Staples or something like that. They bought some neon vests and hard hats to make it look like they were city workers or whatever. And they went back and forth with this ground penetrating radar system, which really looks like a souped up lawnmower. And they went back and forth over the whole. We kind of drew a big circle around the whole area, and they just said, everything underneath here is hard packed clay, except for the one spot that Erik said to look, and that's been disturbed. And so that was our first hit that, now we have some physical evidence that there was something down there. And we sat on that. We tried to do some local coordination, not a lot of interest, but we got another set of volunteers, and these were folks that sent in some of the 2 best cadaver dogs in the country that went up there. And they went up there in the first weekend in October. And the one, Moxie, which was the senior dog, was able to pinpoint 4 locations where they smelt something. And they said, usually when a dog will smell something, they don't go ape shit and anything like that. They sit down and get ready for their reward. Yeah. And he hit 4 places, but the most prominent place that the dog identified was exactly in the same spot. He identified a place down slope, which could also be because of the way the digging occurred, and it's more porous than cement, and a couple of others. One of the problems that we want to make sure, this is why our next step, what we want to do is we'd love to drill down with a 3-inch hole, either sideways through the berm or top through the cement, and then patch that up with cement. But to take a sample, because 500 yards away there is a old Civil War cemetery, and the dogs will smell that too if the wind shifts. So we want to make sure there's no false positives or anything like that. Our biggest frustration is before we did that, we did try to go to the FBI, and we did try to go to, first we went to the Milwaukee Police Department. They said it's not our case. It's a bureau case, so we can't handle it. So we went to the local off-field office, and at first we got nothing, but then when we told them, I was like, look, we're going to be going public with this. Then we got, messages that said, look, that we know we work slow. We apologize for not getting back with you. We would love to work with you. The problem is, and this is the second part, we've already talked about how you got this conspiracy theory culture that doesn't want these cases solved. But, but again, you also have a culture within law enforcement that does not like to work, obviously, outside with, unvetted or unknown organizations to them, And I got a buddy in the FBI who, sorry, I got to unlock my computer again. I got another buddy in the FBI who that has told me, he said, and I was talking to him about this. He was really kind of defending the Bureau, just like, look, we go off of maybe 30 to 40% of our cases are based on tip-offs that we get from the public. Right, a tip-off, but not a case that has been investigated and brought to you wrapped with a bow, because one, you didn't do the work. So how can you trust, even from a liability standpoint, how can you trust? It's like, look, you you're going to rely upon a civilian organization, you got to start this investigation all over again, because we need to, besides the fact it's like, well, we need to have the credit, we also have to be able to vet every single step. We just cannot trust your word that you talked to this guy, that you did this, you found this piece of evidence, or you had proper chain of custody over a very important piece of evidence. This is why for the Zodiac case, we think we have a location where he buried his 9mm and 22 caliber pistols up into Sierra Highlands. Could we get a helicopter, go and dig it up and then bring it down? Yeah, but that would break the chain of custody. So we're trying to get local law enforcement to go up there with us to pinpoint it, so they would have a yes, we'll be witness to that. And that's, again, but then again, you still have to break the culture of, we didn't solve this case, we don't want to work on it. And so they'll go off of a tip off, but they don't want to work with folks, even guys, again, the guys are on our team. We have 5 universities involved. We have forensic experts. We have behavioral scientists. We have one of the guys we brought in, Jim Christie, was a former Air Force OSI special investigator for 20 years. I mean, these guys, professionals that know their stuff, and I'm just providing intel support to them. Doing this type of analysis. And another gal that's on our team, Jen Buchholz, out of Colorado, she's actually solved the case in Arkansas by starting up a Facebook group with, and having people join that are familiar with it. Well, the guy who was the killer joined the group. And, that's one of the ways that they found that new piece of evidence. That's what they were doing, is let's get together and talk. It's like, does anybody have some new piece of evidence? Well, inadvertently, this guy started revealing indicators that was him. And that's how they were able to identify this guy. And now I think he's been incarcerated for it. That's what I mean. But, the concept is there and the concept works. But you got to overcome this culture. But that culture is also being fueled by, every conspiracy theorist out there that's giving them tip-offs on one thing or another. Now, they did digs in Michigan. I think it was a horse farm or something like that. And the Bureau went in there and they had like 72 hours that they dug up the plot where they thought it was going to take, it was going to happen. Fantastic. But after they didn't find anything, they shut it down. Well, as soon as they shut it down and closed it up, every nut job with a shovel went out there and tore the whole place apart. That's what was our fear. It's like, we don't want that to happen to this place. Thank God it's a ballpark with, it's covered by cement. It's like, you're not going to get those kind of crazies. But if there's anywhere that was remotely open to the public, good Lord, that fuels the law enforcement perception is, I don't want to work with these guys, because if I work with these guys, I got to work with every conspiracy theorist out there that thinks the Michigan militia is trying to arm the KGB and have them take over the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I'm saying that because that was actually one of the things that we found out on Naval Danger. One of the conspiracy theories that we came up with was that one. And it was just like, how am I going to go to the Bureau when the same people that told us this great piece about Al-Qaeda is giving us this garbage? So that's what law enforcement has to struggle with on a daily basis now, especially now that these investigative things are more and more in the hands of civilians. We can do our own geospatial analysis now. We can do our own ground penetrating radar. We can find the right people. We can go fund our own DNA labs. Those kind of things. We can do this all on the private side. They got to come to grips with that the capability is growing at an exponential rate to do investigations and intelligence analysis on the outside.
It's the same thing with the democratization of combat. You can go out and you can reliably shoot a rifle 5 miles now with the off-the-shelf software and scope. Anybody can make a drone that can deliver something evil. And so we have to understand that analysis and big data-driven analysis is on your computer, right? And you have these Facebook groups that are crazy about something. And someone will notice something that no one else could possibly notice because it's down the street from their house. Like, no, that picture's backwards, or whatever it is, and then it unlocks something. So it's amazing. When you talked about where you guys think Hoffa was buried, you had about 3 qualifiers in there. You weren't like, he is definitively here, right? So
right. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, I've been very skeptical on this one. Again, just from the whole the whole thing, nobody wants to repeat Geraldo Rivera's, infamous episode, but once the cadaver dogs sniff that out, that is worth doing a drill down for $500 to patch it up to verify that spot. And again, it maybe it's not Hoffa, but if they smell something down there, somebody's down there. Same thing with the New Jersey. I think they're talking about the New Jersey dump yard where they said, hey, they found some 55-gallon drums that are buried underneath there. All they got to do is dig it up. I'm sure from a mob standpoint, there's somebody buried down there, but who knows if it's I don't think that's obviously Hoffa because we think we got intel where but it's still it's the same thing. It's like even if it's not him, having a cadaver dog pick that up and pinpoint that. That's picking a needle in a haystack with a haystack of needles. That you just don't go into one remote part of Wisconsin and just pinpoint on the ground and say this 10-meter area, we think this is it. And then have corroborating data from two separate hits that come up later.
Right now, sitting here, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm just curious. What are the odds that you guys have the spot that Jimmy Hoffa is buried?
I'm more than 50%, but again, there is skepticism in the back. Here's the thing: is one of the things I thought that we thought of initially. Says, what? Even if the cadaver dogs picked it out, he could have been excavated as part of the construction of this Little League ball field, and a group of the backhoes like, hey, I got somebody buried some industrial waste under here or whatever. Yeah, it looks pretty nasty. Yeah, just chuck it. So it may have been that he was there for a very short period of time, and when they made that Little League ball field, they destroyed it, and the dogs are picking up residual effects. You can never say that. Look, we're 100% on this one.
Right. Right.
I don't have the percentage confidence. This is us Intel guys. We do this all the time. What's your high degree most likely less.
Right.
I'm much more confident in the Cooper case and the Zodiac case than this one, only because there are still a lot more pieces that we know exist of evidence from friends of Walters and relatives that were friends of Walters who have, we've got a lead on somebody who before they died wrote all this stuff down, and now the spouse has it and doesn't want anybody to see it. We've got leads like that we're following. So there's still more information on this one, but even without it, this is a story in itself that's worth tracking. It's worth taking a look at.
Yeah, it definitely is an interesting one. Through my connection of people, I know when that movie The Irishman came out, right? A friend of mine writes books, and he's like, I know that guy's lawyer. So The Irishman's lawyer has been on this show. So you have so you have all these connections. And when he talks about his client, who's been dead, but he's got compelling stuff. He's a lawyer and he's supposed to, and maybe he's right. Maybe it wasn't that guy. And who knows, right? But you have to sit back and be objective and look at how the pieces fit together. And once they don't. It's like all of these different suspects in the Zodiac case. Like, oh, my guy's Dalkowski. You're like, why? Right, because Gray Smith got scared in someone's house. Okay, but that's not evidence, and most of those guys have a fatal flaw where it cannot be them. Like, for example, the main guy everybody talks about, what's that guy's name? Alan Lee Arthur, right? Or whatever his name is. Yeah. His DNA is not on something that was on a piece of Zodiac mail. So maybe he had somebody else lick that piece of mail, but the odds are now tremendously lower that it was ever him. Arthur Lee Allen is just not the Zodiac, right?
This is why cases go cold because you run into disqualifiers. That's just like, look, this couldn't have happened this way. This couldn't have happened this way. So once you get rid of what's the Sherlock Holmesian phrase is like, once you get rid of, all of the things that are possible, what's left is probably what happened.
Yeah.
So, that's where, good Lord, how many digs did the Bureau have to go on off of information that honestly they wouldn't have spent the resources if they didn't really believe that that's what it was. And and the guys that I know that in it, they're just like, oh man, why are you doing this? It's like, why? Right. We exhausted ourselves doing this. That's another reason why they don't want to work. It's like, why go through the embarrassment once again? This FBI is not having a good year, by the way. And so, you know, so the one guy asked me, it's just like, why are you doing this? It's like, because Hoffa's daughter is still alive and his son is still alive. And his daughter's a retired judge. And she said, you know, for the rest of her life. And if, you know, and I lost my dad when I was 15. So to a gal that was driving and hit him from behind while putting makeup on, you know, killed him outright after 3 weeks in a coma. If that was a murder, I would spend the rest of my life trying to solve it myself. You know, I would want that to know. And if I knew who it was, I would, you know, honestly, it's like in this life or the next, I would seek retribution. That's the kind of passion that people feel about their own family. So when I see that, and this is going to go into the next case that we've also tackled was the Atlanta child murders, and seeing that, you know, you have 26 young African-American boys that were killed. Only 2 of them were physically linked to the guy in jail now, Williams, because of the fibers on them was the fibers from on the bodies were the fibers from his car. And again, as we got a tip off on that one, which we're currently working. That one, I actually called up Gina Smith, our great interrogator from Germany.
Yes.
I called her up and I asked her to work it. She said, heck yeah, I'll work it. And then 2 weeks later, she was researching the case. She called me back. She goes, I don't want to work it anymore. And I was asked her, I was like, what's the problem? She's like, it's bringing up all kinds of PTSD. I can't, it's not, no. And it's that one, you know, Hoff is very interesting. Zodiac's very interesting. Yeah. The Atlanta child murders, honest to God, is one of the most depressing stories you'll ever hear, because you got 24 families that never had real closure with the loss and disappearance of and of the 26, only one of the bodies was never found, and it was a 10-year-old boy named Darren Glass. That family is never going to have closure on that unless somebody breaks that case. We think we may be able to, but again, this is another one that's a long, slow haul. Doing it ourselves with local expertise and you know, experts around the country. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you guys doing all that. I know being a case breaker is not an easy thing. You know, you take on something that does create PTSD, and you are trying to be respectful and mindful of the law enforcement burden, you know, while still pushing them to try to do that. None of that stuff is something that you have to do. You could just simply go watch little kids play at the ballpark. And I've been to that stadium. It is fantastic. I'm like, if I was a little leaguer, I'd love to play here, right?
Yeah.
But I appreciate you guys doing it.
Well, I mean, the thing is we're all volunteers. I mean, the only guy, you know, Tom Colbert, to his credit, you know, this guy's sunk in a great part of his life savings in order to work this, because it's just investigative reporting is just in his blood. The rest of it, you know, really are spending our time mostly, but again, we're volunteers and we don't get paid for it. We don't have compensation. We don't have we don't have anything that's out there that's going to, you know, we don't run CooperCon. We don't run, you know, all that kind of things. But we keep getting disinvited from true crime conventions because nobody wants folks to come in and says, hey, we think we solved it. You don't need to have this convention anymore. So.
Yeah. Game's over. Yeah, it's crazy. And I'm assuming the Zodiac case, if you can talk about it at all, has only become more ironclad. Because it seems like every time you talk, you're like, it's like there's always something new that happens.
Yeah, that one's we're at the point where it's like there's not much more we can. It's like we put it out there. That's what it is. I mean, you know, if somebody wants to pick that up and go from there, that's great. You know, we do get lots of requests for folks sending us emails. Will you please help me find my lost son? Will you please help me find the killer of my murdered, you know, husband or whatever. Yeah. Those are just incredibly sad. I mean, I say that we got a lot of national level experts, but you know, instead of having that, what you need to have folks that are retirees that are formed in every state that picks that up and works hand in hand with law enforcement. But so it requires both a vetting process for the folks that are working it, as well as a vetting process by law enforcement that that whatever team is working with them is going to be on the up and up.
Yeah. I had a guy on the show, and he focuses on improperly convicted people, you know, where the police will lock onto somebody And then it turns out, hey, no way that Erik killed his mom because, this and this and this. And so exoneration, free from prison. And he's like, the problem is that most of the time, even if there's a very good secondary lead, no conviction ever comes, right? And it's just the nature of the beast, right? There'll be officers that, even if it's like, no, Erik couldn't have done it because his DNA is not there, and whatever else it is, that cop will just never, ever, ever, you can never convince that person, because once they've locked on, and it's impossible to find the right person. And so there's all kinds of cases like this where, this person didn't do it. Well, who did it?
Yeah.
Never going to know.
I tell you, working in the business of analysis is one of the most difficult jobs you can have, because humans are involved and there are so many fallacies and mistakes and, psychological grooves that we get into. It's, golly, it's so frustrating. And nobody ever wants to admit A, that they're stupid, or A, that they were wrong, because then that leads to that they're not smart. Nobody ever wants to admit that stuff. So you have to deal with so many different layers of, both within the cases that the people that you're looking at, as well as but within your own mind. Am I looking at this correctly? Am I getting rid of my biases? Am I thinking critically about this data, or as I'm reading this article, am I doing my critical thinking? And I tell you, that should be a Boy Scout merit badge, is critical thinking. We get away with it when we say, well, we can rely upon ChatGPT now to do that. It's like, no. Instead of saying, what's the answer to this, we should be asking, why did the tool come up with this as an answer? And I tell you, I work AI now as part of my regular day job. And one of the biggest concerns right now in the intel agencies is what's called hallucinations. So you have tools like ChatGPT there as an AI tool they do what's called, both predictive and like basically are creating information out of nothing. And so if they're trying to summarize an article that's being read or whatever, what a hallucination is that the tool is making things up based upon other stories that it's read, and says, the author of this is this person, and probably this person. When in reality is like the third person had nothing to do with it. That's the hallucination that these tools are now doing. So guess what? The tools are making the same mistakes that we do as humans.
Yeah, I had a guy on the show the other day. He wrote a book about John Glenn and Ted Williams and their lifelong friendship once they met during the Korean War. Oh, yeah. And you want Ted Williams to be this great pilot, but it turns out if you don't practice being a pilot, you don't get to be great at it. He can have great eyes, everything else. John Glenn actually was an incredible pilot. Yeah. But if you type into Bing search or ChatGPT and you say, is Ted Williams an ace pilot? Yes.
Okay.
And it's like, oh, well, that's just, that's not accurate at all. Right?
Well, the thing is, it relies upon the algorithm that a human wrote, and then the algorithm relies upon articles that another human wrote. So if you get bias in any of those, guess what? The tool is going to have bias.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want to take you more of your time. You got anything for me? Anything else you want to say?
No, that's great. Appreciate you letting us run around the whole world tonight. So it's all good. We ended up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Next thing you know, we're gonna have to have like a boat tour of Malacca, the Straits of Malacca, so we can talk about the strategic importance of it. All right, let me run these credits. Hang on, and I'll say goodbye. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching.